Thanks, Kate, and welcome everyone to part 2. Flora and I are really happy to be back to pick up where we left off because we didn't have time to get to all of the slides last time, and then also incorporate a lot of your questions into the presentation. So we're going to get started today by talking about accessible PowerPoints. And this feels like a nice place to start because we'll touch on, it'll be almost like a review in a sense, because many of the factors that go into creating an accessible PowerPoint are going to be familiar from the last session. So when you create an accessible PowerPoint, many of the same elements are at play, such as including alt text, making sure if your slide contains a link that it's an accessible hyperlink. And just to get into a few new things that are specific to PowerPoints, you want to make sure that you use the built-in slide layouts. These built-in slide layouts that are available within Microsoft PowerPoint offer a uniform readability by screen readers. You want to avoid using too many text boxes within one slide. One or two text boxes is okay, but if you get more than a couple of text boxes on a slide, there's not a guarantee that the screen reader is going to read them in the correct order without you going in and doing some extra work. You'll want to give your slides unique titles so that as someone is sort of scrolling through the list of slides, they'll know exactly what they're going to be learning about before they click on or activate one of the slides. And you'll also want to avoid using tables. Now, Flora's going to help us out here because with this next part, because there's a very odd way within Microsoft PowerPoint to set the reading order of your slide content. And it's not very intuitive, so we think that a real-time demo will be helpful with this. So Flora, you want to walk us through that selection pane?
Yes. All right. Hi, everyone. This is Flora. Excited to be here again today. Thank you for joining us on what is a really lovely day in Boston and hopefully a nice day where you are. So I have left the presenter view of the PowerPoint so I can show you how this one unintuitive piece works. So last time when we were talking a lot about Microsoft Word, we were talking about the ribbons that are at the top where you have, the slides option, the font, paragraph, the drawing option. So if we're looking at this PowerPoint in like the editing look, the way it would look if you were editing it yourself, at this top ribbon, there's a little sub menu called editing. This is where you can find the find and replace options. There's also something called select. That's what we're going to click on. That drops down 3 options: select all, select objects, and selection pane. We want that last one. So we're going to click selection pane. It pops out a little thing on the right side. And apologies again, I can only zoom in the slide. I can't make the other parts of my screen bigger. But on this right side, this little window that pops up is the selection pane. And it says selection. And it says show all, hide all. And then it lists 2 items. One is called Content Placeholder 2, and the other one is called Title 1, and they're listed in that order. So the thing that Amber mentioned is that in order for it to, and apologies if you can hear the plane that's taking off in the background, I live pretty close to the airport. If you want the title and the content, the actual body of text on the slide to read in that order, you have to have them backwards. We tried testing them and seeing like, is this really true? And it actually is. We kind of didn't believe the internet there, but we probably should have. So right now it's listed as content placeholder 2 and title 1. So if you have them in this order, the screen reader will then read this slide, title first, which is PowerPoint, continued, and then the body of text. If you have it in the wrong order, you have 2 options. So let's first take this out of order, and then we'll put it back in order. So now it says title 1 and then content placeholder 2. I have 2 options. One, I can click either of these. Let's click title 1. When I click it, the outline of the title it kind of gets highlighted. Like it looks like I can start to drag and drop that box. That just tells me, which one is title 1. It's this thing at the top. There's an up and then a down arrow on the right side. If I click that, it'll send it down. The other option is I can actually just click and drag. So I'm clicking title 1. And so let me return it to the wrong order with title 1 first, which is intuitive, but wrong. I'm going to click that, drag it down below content placeholder 2. So 2 options. You either select the one that you want and then click the arrows, or you click and drag. If you have different names, like I see that someone mentioned, one is called subtitle 2 and then title 1. That's fine. I think that has to do with how Microsoft PowerPoint just names these. I could literally take title 1, click into it, and call this, I don't know, I guess title green. And I could change content placeholder. We could call this like body purple. Just, you can name it anything you want. One way to make sure that you understand what they correlate to is there's this little icon over here that has the eye. That is one thing where if you want to just make something disappear and pop back up, you can figure out pretty quickly, which one is which. But if you just click on the item, it'll show the, so for example, I clicked title, and I'm going to change this back to title 1 because the colors are probably not helpful. But if you click title 1, you can kind of see that PowerPoint continued, which is the title, it's outlined. We can see by this light box with these circles on the ends, that kind of implies that it's in editing mode. If I click body, which I'm going to also remove the color here, so I don't confuse anyone, then the body of the text starts to highlight. So regardless of what you have it named in your PowerPoint, the key concept is whatever you want read first, it goes at the bottom. All right, so I'm going to now go back into present mode. And then Amber, you can take it back from there.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's very strange. And as Flora said, I did test the reading order with my screen reader because I really didn't even understand what those instructions were about, but it is true. So remember, bottom to top, content should go bottom to top in a PowerPoint slide. And finally, when you've made your PowerPoint, there is a built-in accessibility checker in Microsoft PowerPoint, which is pretty good about picking up on pieces of your PowerPoint presentation that could be improved for accessibility. So I encourage all of you to take the time to use that. And finally, I skipped over this, but don't export your PowerPoint to a PDF unless you are sure that the PDF is going to be accessible. And I'll touch a little bit more on that a little later. So let's move next to Braille handouts. You may decide that you want to produce Braille copies of your handouts. And if you do so, it's important that you enlist the services of a certified Braille transcriber. Using a certified Braille transcriber will ensure the accurate translation of your document. This will also ensure proper formatting. There are, similar to print, there are different Braille formatting guidelines. And so this is especially important for lengthy documents. It's important that the document is formatted well so that a person who is reading it can skim through the document to find sections that they want to find, if they don't have time to necessarily read through the whole document. And you should also avoid stapling your documents if they are longer than 2 or 3 pages. You should bind the documents with plastic binding combs in this case. We can move now to large print.
Oh, Amber, quick question. I think this was a question from last time. Someone asked about embossing, like printouts, if there is a QR code for Braille, which I thought was really interesting. I was wondering if I had some thoughts about it. I was wondering what your take was.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Unfortunately, there's really no way to show a QR code in Braille. There wouldn't really be a way for someone to scan a QR code. But one thing you could do is, if you had a QR code that you wanted to include in your document, you could make some sort of Braille. You could sort of put a what we call a transcriber's note that says, see below for the QR code. And you could include that code on a sticker possibly, so that someone could then take a picture of that with their phone. That would be one option. And Flora, you mentioned that you had.
Yeah, my thought was that would be really awesome. But also it's good to remember that QR codes are just visual hyperlinks, and they're easier to share because your phone can read the hyperlink. But if you're thinking about printing something out and you're thinking about, how do I put this in Braille? The QR code is just a website. So if you write the link out, that could be a good option for people as well. Or you could just, maybe find their phone number or scan it for them or send it to them via text or email. I just thought that was a cool question that I had not thought of before. So we can continue with large print whenever you're ready.
Okay. Yeah. And I think your ideas are also really, really good ones too. Sometimes, writing out the link can serve the same purpose. So thanks.
Yeah.
So moving on to large print, the font should be 18 point or greater. You should use sans serif fonts. Use bold, dashes, or asterisks to emphasize sections of text. You want to avoid using colored text or italicized text to show emphasis. You want to make sure your line spacing is 1.5 or greater, and titles and headings should be in a larger font and left justified. And it's also important to include descriptions of images, charts, or graphs. And you want to use a high contrast between text and background. And if you're printing these out, you'll want to use a paper with a dull or matte finish.
Oh, quick question, Amber.
Okay.
Is underlining okay for large print if you're trying to emphasize something?
I would say probably not underline. You should probably stick to bold, or you can set that text off by using asterisks.
Cool. All right, and we just had one quick follow-up about QR codes. Give me 1 second to read it. This is more of a broad question, going back to our earlier discussion about QR codes. Do you have a take on whether QR codes make documents more or less accessible?
Just in general, I would say that they probably make documents a bit less accessible. I do think what you touched on, Flora, about just simply making it an accessible hyperlink instead, because it can be difficult to sometimes even locate a QR code to know where like where you need to point your phone camera in order to scan it. And there's also the thought that some people may not even have smartphones that can scan a QR code.
Yep. I personally, my phone battery is always about to die and I'm always out of data. So whenever that happens, I'm always like, can I use someone else's phone for the menu?
Yeah.
I think that there's a good, like, kind of more specific question here, which is about, like, what's more accessible on a flyer, a QR code or, a short link to the web page that'll that web page has easier directives. Me personally, I think it depends on the I guess medium is kind of what I'm trying to say. If I have
Mhm.
physical handouts and I'm handing them out to people with sight and I'm saying, like, please come to, like, visit my website, I think a QR code on that physical paper is a great way for those people to, visit that. But if you're emailing a flyer, emailing a QR code makes less sense to me because the QR code is just an easy way to share a website. If it's already an online flyer, let's say it's an email newsletter, you just put the link right there and I can just click it. If I'm on my phone or on my computer, whatever I'm using to read that email, I can, just click that link right away.
Yeah, I agree. And if you do produce a hard copy of a flyer and you encounter someone who uses, Braille or large print or would prefer that flyer in electronic format, um, you can, it goes back to, I think, having multiple options
Yep,
available,
absolutely.
which will be kind of a recurring theme, I think, today.
Yep, I think so too. Alrighty, I think, where were we? We were at the end of large print, and then did you want to continue there, or do you want to go into user experts?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say about large print. I
Nice.
appreciate those questions, and user expert we'll just briefly touch on because I did jump to that at the very end last time, but I'll just go through these quickly and just remind everyone that if you have any doubts about the accessibility of your handouts and your documents, enlist the help of user experts. So this is going to be a person who is blind or low vision and uses either a screen reader or screen magnifier, and they can evaluate your documents for you. They can sometimes will have the ability to even evaluate them on a few different platforms. So when I do an audit for an accessibility audit for someone, for example, I will use Windows, I'll use Mac, and I'll also use my iPhone. So I sort of will check all three of the most commonly used platforms because unfortunately, just because a document or a website is accessible with one of those operating systems doesn't mean it's going to be accessible on another. So, and if you need help finding user experts, I'd encourage you to go to your local and state cultural councils as well as consumer organizations for the blind, such as American Council of the Blind or National Federation of the Blind. A lot of those consumer groups have active listservs or forums where you can post kind of what you're looking for. And also, if possible, I would just say, if you can, even if it's a small amount, if you can afford to offer some sort of honorarium, or I don't know, even if you're a theater and you want to offer comps, to a performance, try to compensate your user experts in some way. All right, so I guess we can get in now to some of the follow-up Q&A.
Yep.
So We have kind of a broad category here first, where I tried to capture kind of a lot of the different questions that people asked about, there were some questions that people had about automating documents for or processes for access, or if there was one platform that works better. We'll also touch a little bit here on PDFs and PowerPoints again, because that was a theme that came up a good bit. So the first thing I want to let everyone know is that I think it's important to remember that there's really no one size fits all method here to creating these documents. One person's preference or comfort level with a document format is probably going to be different than another person in a group. So if you have colleagues or if you have conference attendees who are going to need accessible documents, I would just say, don't hesitate to ask. Try to, if you can, try to find out what people are going to find most useful, and consider having a variety of formats available. So to kind of touch on the variety of formats piece, let's take a PowerPoint as an example. So you are doing a presentation and you are interested in sharing the information from your PowerPoint. The first option would simply be sharing the PowerPoint itself, which you've created in Microsoft PowerPoint. As we talked about earlier, those are perfectly accessible as long as you follow a few simple steps. So you could offer that. Another option would be to put all of the content from your PowerPoint into a Microsoft Word document. You could use different headings to delineate the beginning of each new slide. And you could follow the same practices, alt text, hyperlinks, etc. So you could have it available as a PowerPoint. And if there are individuals who really prefer PDFs, as long as it meets all the accessibility standards, you could have a PDF too. But I really caution here that if you're going to offer a PDF, or in a worst case scenario, if all you can offer is a PDF, which I really don't recommend, but if that is all you can offer, you really want to ensure that it's accessible and have it vetted by a user expert. So when you, and going now, I guess this sort of segues a little bit into, we got a few more questions about PDFs, and I'm not really going to say a lot about PDFs. I know there's a big need and a desire out there for a really in-depth look at PDFs, but I'm not really the person to do that. I think that you really need to hear from someone who has a lot of experience creating accessible PDFs. I certainly have experience using them, but not so much getting into all the details of creating them. But I'll talk about a couple of things that people asked about, and one of those was tags. A few people wanted me to talk about tags again. So the most basic definition of a tag is computer code which defines elements of the document for screen reading software. So this means that the titles of your document must be tagged as headings for efficient navigation with a screen reader. Lists must be tagged as lists. Forms, if you have forms that you're wanting people to fill in, those have to be tagged as forms. so that the screen reader will allow someone to actually type information into a blank space. So that's just a very bare bones definition of tagging. Now the advantage, I know several of you also asked about PDF programs like Canva and kind of lesser known programs, but I just want to put out there that the advantage of using a program such as Adobe Acrobat is that Acrobat has actually included tools for you to get very specific about editing your tags and also editing the logical structure or reading order of the document by a screen reader. So, and actually on the Adobe website, they have a whole section dedicated to accessibility and to touching up reading order and editing tags. So I would encourage people who want more information to do that, to go to that website and look at that. And finally, just to touch on, someone asked a question, is there an automated way to perform accessibility? Not really. I mean, I mentioned the last time there are Braille translation softwares out there, but these software programs are not perfect. And if you run a document through a Braille translation software without having anyone proofread it, or even without having a Braille transcriber look at the output, I can't guarantee that you'll get something that's 100% readable. And if I were to name one platform or one type of document that will set you up for success in terms of accessibility, I'd have to say Microsoft Word. If you make an accessible Word document, you're going to have a lot of flexibility in what you can do with it. And unfortunately, that's just not something that's there in a format like Google Docs. Google Docs, it can be used, but the user who is using it with a screen reader really has to jump through a good many hoops and learn a lot of extra keyboard commands and shortcuts. So I'd really say that, Microsoft Word is going to be your best bet.
Yeah. Sorry, Amber, go ahead.
Oh, just for sort of like a foundation, and then you can expand from there.
Yeah, I know that there were a couple of comments / questions about, for fun looking documents, Microsoft Word is really finicky with the line wrapping. Like you take half of a breath and your entire paragraph is just on a separate page. I think that's a very fair criticism of the product. But I think, like Amber said, as far as if you're looking for the most accessible product, Microsoft Word is your best bet. It might be helpful to create, different, like we said, like different variations. And so if someone would like to read it on Microsoft Word, have that ready. And if instead someone has sight and they would like to see, like your prettiest PDF that you can put together, you could offer that too. That's not to say create, a bunch of different options. Just if it's the same information, the same core piece of information, it might not hurt to offer a couple of different options. The other kind of difficult thing to remember here is that Microsoft, especially in the whole Office suite, have been, so ubiquitous in our technology since the start of computers. It's hard to remember. These are just product offerings. The same way that you could choose a Samsung phone versus an Apple iPhone. These are all product offerings, and they're designed by engineers, and they are, sold by sales teams. If you or your organization has a license, you might have a dedicated sales rep, and their job is to advocate for you and to help you. So you might, want to tell them, like, I really wish there were more accessibility options, in this product I use, or, like, I use Google Docs because that's what our company has, but I have a lot of colleagues that really would prefer that it has the same level of accessibility as Microsoft Word. It's not just these are products and there's not much you can do about them, but at the same time, they are consumer driven. And every person's, I guess, opinion there could make some kind of a difference. Amber, we did have an interesting question about, for Google Docs, the way you can export them, you can like save as a Google Doc, you can save as a Word doc. So it's .docx.
Mhm.
Do you know if when you save it into a Word doc in that way, does it become more accessible? Or is your recommendation kind of start and end in Microsoft Word itself?
I've had varied experiences because anytime I am presented with a Google Doc, that's generally my go-to, is to export it to Word. But I will say that unfortunately I've had some good experience doing that, but then I've had other documents that have not exported as well. So I would say that is something that you could try, but it's very much going to be kind of a trial and error. So if you do that, you'd want to test it out either by downloading a free screen reader, which we will talk about shortly, or by having a user expert just test that out really quickly to make sure it works.
Sounds good. All right. Maybe we pause for a second before we move from kind of general best practices into, so our next category is going to be alt text. So if you had more questions there, hold them. And we will touch upon screen readers at the end as well. But if you have any kind of more general best practicey, questions there, we'll just hold tight here for a little bit and let people get any questions in that they have. Alrighty. I don't see any questions yet, Amber. If you want to move on to alt text, we can do so. And if I see questions about best practices, I'll, bring them up once you're done.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about alt text because we did have some questions. And I think for this, to kind of stick to the confines of this particular presentation, which is really about creating accessible handouts, we were mostly focusing on alt text rather than, say, a longer image description of a piece of art, for example. So I think the metaphor, I think that, I think you came up with a really nice metaphor, Flora, for kind of how to think about alt text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it helps with alt text. Think of it like you're watching a TV show and you turn on the subtitles. The goal of the subtitles is just to use, just get everyone on the same page. What did they say? Obviously, if it's, if it's captioning what I'm saying right now, that's a little easier. It's almost like a one-to-one conversion. The thing that's I've been thinking about, just because it's been a funny meme that my friends have been sending around again. There's a meme from The Sopranos where Tony Soprano and like one of his, I don't even know, coworkers, like co-henchmen, they're really mad at someone. So they're just like, their fists are raised in the air. They're these two kind of bald Italian men, and they're big, and they're just yelling. The subtitle transcription only says inarticulate Italian, which gets the point across. Those two men are both saying very distinct words, but instead of the subtitles, translating whatever they're saying, They're trying to communicate that overall it is two large, angry men who are yelling, blood pressure is high, and it gets everyone to the same page. So when you think about alt text and you think about, I give a handout to someone, we put an image in here. Everyone who is, ingesting this handout has a right to know, like, what is that image? But it's not important to go super into detail and paint a picture with your words. So if you think of it as subtitles, just think about, how can I get everyone to the same level of understanding? The example we used last time was a photo of the Kennedy Center with the text, "The Kennedy Center welcomes you," across it. And that's the goal, is just that everyone knows we are looking at a photo of a building on a nice day, and there is some text that is using, welcoming language. If you were doing image description, if you were doing an art breakdown of it, a visual analysis of it, you could talk about the width of the pillars around the building. And you could talk about, like the clouds in the sky. Are they fluffy? Are they the really dense, long ones? Kind of, I don't know the names of clouds. I wish I did. Are there trees? What kinds of trees? What season is it? But if the goal is just, here's a handout, I just want you to know that this is the image, and I want you to have the same understanding of what I've typed up here. Think about them in two different ways. Someone just mentioned a really great comparison, which is that alt text is equals purpose, whereas image description equals detail. And that's a really, really great point. So thank you for mentioning that. But yeah, I think it's a little weird to think about. I myself had a harder time understanding it. But if you Google just like alt text examples, if a picture of a Doritos bag, a white background, a red Doritos bag sits on there, which is, not the best flavor, but anyway. The goal is just that we understand we are looking at a picture of a bag of Doritos. And if you want to break down the logo, the font, the colors, the different shades of red, that's image description. So if it's a little difficult to be concise, think about, am I describing things to paint a picture, or am I describing things so that everyone has the same basic understanding?
And again, I would go back to, if you have a need, I know some people may really have a need to use longer image descriptions in documents or handouts. I would go back to that same point that I've been repeating a lot, but it's important, and that's to run those by a user expert who can really verify how useful those image descriptions are going to be.
Absolutely. I don't see any other follow-up questions about alt text. Let me see if there's anything that we didn't cover. I think we did. Do you want to move on to screen readers?
Sure.
Nice.
So some people asked if there was a website that would kind of simulate a screen reader. There's not, at least not that I know of, but there is a free screen reading software that anyone can download and install. You don't have to pay anything, even for updates. It'll just let you know periodically when updates are available. And it is important that you do keep it up to date if you decide to go this route and put it on your computers. Whenever it tells you that there's an update, you do want to go ahead and install the update, because as the program is updated, it just ensures greater accessibility. So the screen reader is called Non-Visual Desktop Access, or we just use the acronym NVDA. And so you can go to, which the link is on the slide, but you can go to nvaccess.org to download that. And I do think this is a good idea. Although I do want to caution people that when you are testing your own documents or, possibly kind of branching out, but if you're testing your own websites, things like that, you have to remember that you cannot use your computer mouse. If, you might use your computer mouse every day on a regular basis, but when you are testing those documents or those websites with a screen reader, it's important for you to remember that screen reader users do all of the navigation with the computer keyboard. There are some keystrokes which will mimic a left click or a right click, but that is not accomplished by using the mouse itself. So just because you can click on a link in a document with a mouse doesn't necessarily mean that it's able to be activated with the enter key or the space bar on a keyboard. So if you have any ambivalence about using only your keyboard, or if you just really want kind of more in-depth testing, that's why again we talk about user experts. But certainly for like a brief test, just to kind of make sure you're on the right track, or just to hear how something might be read, I think it's a great idea for a lot of people to have NVDA installed on their systems.
Absolutely.
And I should also say that it only works with, this is only for the Windows operating system. If you have a Macintosh, there's actually a built-in screen reader for the Mac, which is called VoiceOver. So you don't even have to download anything. It's just there. Oh gosh, I should have thought about this earlier, and I could have gone into more detail about how to get you up and running with VoiceOver. But if you do a search for it, there are definitely instructions. It might be possible. I mean, I use a Mac myself, and I use the keyboard shortcut command. Hold down the command key and press the F5 key. So that might work for everybody. I think that probably works out of the box, just like I don't think you have to configure that in any way. So that might do it.
Yeah, Amber, I just hit the, what is it called? Spotlight, whatever they call their, I don't know why they have names for everything, but I think it's called Spotlight Search when you hit your command button
space
down, and then you hit the space, and that's just how you search your whole Mac. I just ran that, and it opens up VoiceOver utility, and then it gives you all sorts of options.
Yeah.
So I think however you are used to searching for things on your Mac, if you have a Mac and cannot use, if you only have a Mac and cannot use the NVDA, that's also an option. It also just, a lot of these things, if you're curious, just give it a quick Google and see what's out there. There's a lot more resources, I think, than you think.
Yeah, and I do have to say, I mean, it's not, for someone who really knows how to use VoiceOver, it's not too hard, but for someone who's never used VoiceOver on the Mac before, it's a little bit, there's some kind of strange keyboard like key combinations that you have to use to get VoiceOver to work. So it's not quite as easy as just using NVDA on Windows, but if you really have the desire to kind of delve into that and learn it, you certainly can. In fact, I think within the VoiceOver utility, there's a whole tutorial on VoiceOver. So
my VoiceOver always turns on when I'm slamming buttons with my elbow because I'm eating a sandwich while using my laptop. And my computer starts talking to me, and I'm like, no, stop, please. So, alrighty. I don't see any questions about screen readers. We can move on to handouts. We're going to return to our fun little Word doc demo. This is going to involve me switching what I'm screen sharing, and I think Amber's going to switch over her screen reader input / output. So give us, a second, maybe a little more than a second, and then we will be back up and running. So let me go and get this into this shape, and then let me stop screen sharing here and then share a new one. Alrighty. So I have hopefully shared the correct document. It should be the Word document that we looked at last time, a white background, and then in varying shades of blue, it says LEAD Conference 2022. The next line is where, Raleigh, North Carolina. Next line is when, August 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So if you cannot see that, throw it into the chat, throw it into the Q&A, let me know that I am sharing the wrong screen. So there were a couple of things we just wanted to revisit here. One is that we got a very good point in the comment that using different shades of blue, we literally said that, use high contrast colors, and then we didn't do that. I would apologize, but I blame Microsoft because they made these styles, but really the fault is with me. So I apologize for that. Thank you so much if you were the person who pointed that out. The easy way to fix this, sorry, I'm scrolling while I fidget. The easy way to fix this is let's just make all of the text black so that it is black text on a white background, so that those who are able to see if it's high contrast, that gives you the best shot. The easiest way to do so is just to highlight everything. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control, keep that held down, and then A. So Control A, that just highlights everything. Another way to do this, if you are not comfortable using keyboard shortcuts, is the good old drag and select and keep holding method. So we click our cursor, so it's at the very start of the document in front of the L, which is our first word. And then we're going to kind of click there, hold, and then we pull our mouse down, and then the screen will kind of scroll a little and it'll come down here. So since we're doing this, we can end the selection before our hyperlink. In the other case, because it selects everything, I think the hyperlink gets also selected. Since it is a hyperlink, we would like it to be different. But if you don't if you don't have a different color for the hyperlink, by default, most hyperlinks are this bright royal blue. If we turn everything into black, that's still okay because the hyperlink word is bolded and underlined. So visually, it still sends a message that, this word is different. This word is a hyperlink. So let's continue to highlight there. And then if we go up to the top ribbon, we go to the paragraph. Oh, we don't do that one. We go to the next one, which is the font menu. In the font menu, there's, you see the option for the font type, is it Calibri? Is it Tahoma? Is it Times New Roman? You can change the font size. You can bold, italics, underline things. We're going to go over to the bottom right corner where we have the font color option. We're going to click the drop down, and two options here for turning the font into the color black. You can either go to under theme colors where the black option is listed, or at the top, black is actually listed as the automatic color. This is just a shortcut. I think on most computers, that is the shortcut, but if it's not your shortcut, that's totally okay. Just find whichever color you're looking for. In this case, we're looking for the color black, and let's go and select that and then click. So now everything on this sheet is different shades of black. However, it's maintained the formatting that we applied by using the styles menu, or if you remember, we did heading 1 versus heading 2. We've kept that formatting. It's just that they're not different shades of blue. So the other reminder that we got that was also important is that, especially with large print, like we mentioned on the slide, it's good to have sans serif fonts. So serifs are just the little feet that are like on Times New Roman, when you draw a T, the T has like little feet on the sides and on the bottom. Those are the serifs. If you take them away, sans just means without. So sans serifs fonts are just fonts that don't have the little feet. So Times New Roman is a serifed font. Arial and Calibri and Tahoma, all of these do not have serifs. Helvetica, I believe, also does not have a serif, although I haven't seen Helvetica in a long time. So what we're going to do is select all of our text, change it just to, one uniform font. And that way, if people are looking at it, you don't have the extra clutter of the serifs kind of making things even more convoluted and difficult to read. So this time I'm going to click Control A, so everything is selected. And then I'm going to go to the font menu that we were just in when we changed the font color. And then we have options. I'm going to click Arial because it's really high up on my list and I don't have to scroll all the way down. If you wanted to, you could go down and let's see if we have Calibri. We do. So there's all sorts of menus. We can just click Arial here. And so now everything is a sans serif font. I'm going to hit Control S to save because it's important to remember to save your documents. Sorry, someone is trying to buzz my building. But now we have updated the colors so that everything is the same font color that is black against a white background for high contrast. And we have improved the font style from something with serifs to something without serifs. So that should help a bit. All right, Amber, did you have anything else there that you wanted to add or edit?
Nope, I think that's it. I know we're getting really close to the end here, but I think this will only take a minute or two. We had a request from the last webinar. Someone wanted to hear the demo document read by my screen reader. So I'm happy to do that now. I will unplug my headset and then hopefully that will let everyone hear the audio. And I have slowed the speech down quite a bit so that everyone will be able to understand it. So here we go.
LEAD Conference 2022. LEAD where? Raleigh, North Carolina. When? August 3rd, 4 and 5. Why attend? You will have the chance to hear presentations by arts and culture professionals from organizations such as you will have the chance to bullet museums, bullet libraries, bullet zoos, bullet aquariums, bullet theaters, bullet museums, bullet libraries, bullet zoos, bullet aquariums, bullet theaters. Out of page 2, in page 2, page 1, link, page 2, Kennedy Center access. For more information, visit the Office of Accessibility at the Kennedy Center. Link, Kennedy Center access. Kennedy Center out of a 2-level rectangular, no visible top, page 1, page 2. Page 2, in page 2, a 2-level rectangular building supported by slim beams stands in front of a body of water beneath a blue sky. Across the top of the photo, in large white letters, it reads, "The Kennedy Center welcomes you."
So here it was reading the alt text that Flora wrote for that image.
Yep. And while we have the alt text pulled up, just a reminder that if you do have an image that is not important at all to describe, there is an option to check the mark as decorative option in the alt text. And in terms of how I got to the alt text menu, I clicked the image that was in my Microsoft Word document. I right clicked, and then at the bottom, it's edit alt text. And that's all there was for it. There is also a generate a description for me button. And as another reminder from the first webinar, when they generate it, it's the Microsoft UI writing it. It's a pretty cool tool. It's pretty good to see where they start, but someone made a great reminder. Just make sure you check it. Don't trust it completely. You have to also proofread that.
Yep, that is so true. And with that, that brings our part to a close. Thanks everyone for taking the time to attend today. And I hope that you will reach out with questions if you have any more questions. And maybe our paths will cross at LEAD in August. So thanks to Kate and Hannah and everyone else at the Kennedy Center.
Thank you, Amber and Flora. That was fantastic. I'm glad we got to catch up on everything that was left over from last time and some new information as well. That was great. That will conclude today's presentation. We've closed the webinar in just a couple of minutes. And the presentation will be available on the under the rest of the AccessLEAD information on the registration website, probably in about a week. Thank you all and have a great day.